Guys, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends and family. Also, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. When I was 7 years old, my family moved to a small coastal town called Willow Bay. The town had a quiet charm, with weathered cottages lining the shore, a single grocery store, and a small harbor where fishing boats bobbed lazily on the water. But despite the picturesque setting, life there was painfully dull. The population barely reached 500, and most of the town seemed to slow down to a crawl after sunset. For a kid who had grown up in a bustling city, the transition felt suffocating. My parents moved us there to be closer to my grandfather, who had been diagnosed with a heart condition. Our new home sat on the edge of town, surrounded by tall pine trees that whispered whenever the ocean breeze blew inland. The house itself was modest, painted a fading blue with a wraparound porch that creaked underfoot. My room overlooked the woods, and next to it was a small guest room. The two rooms were connected by an old, narrow bathroom, something that would later prove to be more important than I could have imagined. Those first few weeks were tough. I didn't know anyone, and there wasn't much to do. The town had no parks, no arcades, just miles of rocky shoreline and endless forest. My parents must have sensed how lonely I felt, because one afternoon they surprised me with a kitten. She was a sleek black cat with piercing green eyes that seemed far too wise for her tiny frame. Her fur shimmered when the sunlight hit it just right, and she had a white patch on her chest that resembled a crescent moon. We named her Luna. From the moment she stepped out of her crate, Luna became my closest companion. She followed me everywhere, nestling in my lap when I read, curling up next to me when I slept. She was quiet, graceful, and fiercely protective of me. Luna had a habit of watching the woods. She'd perch on the windowsill in my room for hours, her eyes fixed on the dense tree line as though she were waiting for something, or someone. Sometimes at night she would scratch at my bedroom window, even though it was always locked. My parents joked that she must be fascinated by the owls, but I wasn't so sure. One chilly autumn evening, when I was 9, Luna vanished. I had been at school, and when I returned home, there was no sign of her. At first, I thought she was just exploring, but night came, and still she didn't return. The next day turned into a week. We put up posters around town asking if anyone had seen her. My mom posted on community boards and my dad checked with neighbors, but there was nothing. Luna was gone. I cried for days. Willow Bay felt lonelier than ever without her. My parents offered to get another kitten, but I refused. Luna wasn't just a pet. She had been my friend, my shadow. Replacing her felt wrong. Slowly, life went on. I made a few friends at school, and though I still missed Luna, I convinced myself she must have wandered too far into the woods and couldn't find her way back. But 2 years later, Luna returned. It was a rainy evening in late October. The wind howled through the trees, and the scent of salt water hung in the air. My mom was cooking dinner, and my dad was reading in the living room. I was sketching by the window when I heard a faint tapping on the glass. I looked up, and there she was, Luna. Her green eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her black fur was slick with rain. She sat perfectly still, staring at me through the window. My heart leaped. I screamed for my parents, and together we rushed to the front door. I threw it open, expecting Luna to dash inside as she always had before. But she didn't move. She just sat there, watching. My dad stepped forward cautiously. "Luna, is that really you, girl?" Slowly, Luna rose to her feet and walked inside, brushing past me without the excited purring or affection I remembered. She was bigger now, her sleek frame leaner, but what unsettled me most was her silence. She no longer meowed or rubbed against our legs. She simply stared. That night, Luna lay at the foot of my bed, but something felt wrong. She didn't curl up next to me as she used to. Instead, she sat upright, facing the window, her tail twitching. Hours passed, and I couldn't sleep. At some point, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. I sat up, my heart pounding. Luna's ears twitched, but she didn't turn around. The whispering grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the bathroom that connected my room to the guest room. Cautiously, I got out of bed. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. Luna finally moved, leaping down from the bed and padding silently toward the door. She paused, turned her head to look at me, and for a moment I could have sworn her eyes glowed brighter than before. "Come. Look." The whisper came again. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just any whisper. It was Luna's voice. But cats don't speak. I backed away, shutting my bedroom door and locking it. Luna stayed on the other side, scratching lightly at the wood. That night, I didn't sleep. Days passed, and Luna's behavior only grew stranger. She no longer ate with us. She'd vanish during the day and return at night, always staring at the woods. Sometimes, when I thought no one was watching, I'd catch her walking on her hind legs for a few unsteady steps before collapsing back onto all fours. Then the whispers returned. "Come with me to the woods." The voice was clearer now, spoken in broken words that echoed in my room at night. Luna would sit at my door, her green eyes peering under the gap, her paw scratching slowly, rhythmically. My parents didn't believe me. To them, Luna was just adjusting after being gone for so long, but I knew better. That thing wasn't Luna. One final night, it all came to a head. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Wake up! Come! I show you. The woods. Now." I heard the bathroom door creak. My bedroom door was locked, but that didn't matter. Luna, if I could still call her that, was coming through the bathroom. I saw her silhouette in the doorway, standing on her hind legs, wobbling unsteadily. Her fur shivered as though caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Look. Outside. Forest. Waiting. You," she whispered, her voice rattling like dry leaves. Terrified, I dove under my blankets, refusing to look. The sound of her claws tapping against the wooden floor crept closer until I felt a cold paw rest on my head. "I see you," she whispered. And then, silence. When morning came, Luna was gone. The front door was wide open, swinging on its rusty hinges. My parents were frantic, but I knew we wouldn't find her this time. We moved out of Willow Bay by the end of the month. My parents never asked too many questions. Perhaps they didn't want to know. Even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if Luna, or whatever she had become, is still out there waiting for me at the edge of the woods, waiting for me to come and see what she wanted to show me. The night of my 10th birthday, I awoke to the sound of someone whispering my name. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and looked around my small room. Shadows danced across the stone walls, flickering shapes cast by the candle I'd forgotten to snuff out. "Soren," the voice called, distant yet unmistakably clear. It was the first time I heard it, and I was certain it had come from inside my head. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the voice away, but it continued. "Why are you here?" I didn't know what to say. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, my breath shallow. I pulled the rough wool blanket up to my chin, trembling. Minutes passed before the voice faded, leaving me alone with the lingering sense that something had changed forever. I never told my parents about that night. They were good, kind people who worked the land for a living, and they'd already been through enough. My father had suffered an injury a year earlier, and we struggled to make ends meet. I couldn't bring them something as intangible as a voice. They would have worried or prayed or both, and I didn't want to add to their burdens. But the voice came back. It visited me in the dead of night, always whispering the same question. "Why are you here?" Sometimes it grew more insistent, the whisper transforming into a guttural hiss. "You don't belong." One night the voice became louder, angrier. "You stole it!" it growled. "It's mine!" I had no idea what it meant. I pulled my knees up to my chest and hugged them tightly, wishing the voice would go away. But it didn't. Instead, I felt my left arm move of its own accord. It rose slowly, fingers curling into a fist before releasing, curling again. I screamed then, but no sound came out. My voice had been stolen too. In the morning, I stumbled downstairs, pale and exhausted. My mother noticed immediately. "Soren, are you feeling all right?" she asked, brushing my hair out of my eyes. "Just a bad dream," I lied. That's what I told myself, night after night, as the voice continued to haunt me. It would visit me once or twice a month, always at night, always angry. Over time, I memorized the routine. The voice would speak, my body would freeze, and sometimes my arm would move on its own. I did my best to ignore it, pushing the strange occurrences to the back of my mind. But on my 13th birthday, everything changed. I was alone in my room, sitting by the window, when the voice returned. "Leave," it snarled. "You don't belong." "What do you want?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. There was silence. Then the voice said something different. "It's mine. Give it back." "I don't know what you're talking about," I shouted. My left arm shot out, slamming into the stone wall beside me. Pain shot through my hand, but I barely felt it. The voice continued to echo inside my head, angry and insistent. "Give it back." I stumbled to my feet and ran out of the room. I didn't stop until I reached the village square, where the old oak tree stood. Beneath its shadow, I sank to the ground, gasping for air. That's where Corin found me. Corin was an outcast like me, a boy with bright copper hair and a mischievous smile. He asked no questions as he sat down beside me, offering a silent camaraderie I desperately needed. "You ever feel like you're being haunted?" I finally asked, staring at the ground. Corin tilted his head, considering. "Not haunted," he said, "but I've heard stories." "What kind of stories?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Sometimes, when a person dies suddenly, their spirit gets stuck. If something was taken from them, something they believed was theirs, they'll do whatever it takes to get it back." A chill ran down my spine. What if I'm the one who took it? Corin's eyes widened. Then we need to make it right. Together we began our search for answers. We combed through old records at the village library, seeking any mention of a tragedy near my home. We spoke to elders who knew the land's history. But no matter how many questions we asked, we found nothing. The voice, however, grew stronger. It came more frequently, often seizing control of my arm, forcing it to move in that unsettling, repetitive gesture. Sometimes it felt like the voice was testing the limits of my control, waiting for a moment of weakness. Then, on a stormy night, Corin and I made a desperate attempt to communicate with the presence. We gathered in the abandoned barn at the edge of town, lighting candles and drawing symbols we'd copied from old books. We called out to the spirit, begging for it to tell us what it wanted. At first, there was only silence. Then the air grew heavy, the candle flames flickering wildly. My body seized up, and I felt that familiar loss of control as my left arm began to move. "It's mine!" the voice roared, filling my mind with an overwhelming pain. "Give it back!" Through the haze, I saw Corin's terrified face. He tried to shake me free, but I struck out at him, my hand closing around his throat. Tears streamed down my face as I fought for control. "Leave!" I screamed in my head. "This is my body!" The voice faltered, and the grip on Corin loosened. My arm dropped to my side, and I collapsed, sobbing. Corin pulled me into a hug, his breath ragged. "We'll figure this out," he promised. Over the next few days, we pieced together the clues we'd missed. An old woman in the village finally provided the key. Years ago, a boy had vanished near my family's land. The boy had been a traveler's son, and the family had been lost during a violent storm. The carriage they traveled in had crashed, and they were never seen again. It all made sense. The boy had died that night, and somehow his soul had latched onto mine. "It's mine," he'd said. He wanted his life back. Desperate, I returned to the old oak tree. I spoke aloud, telling the spirit what I'd learned. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry you're stuck here, but I can't give you my life. It's not yours." The wind rustled the leaves above me, and for a moment I felt a crushing weight on my chest. Then slowly, it lifted. I heard the voice one last time, faint and sad. "I'll let you be." From that day forward, the voice never returned. Corin and I moved on, growing older, leaving the haunting memories behind. But sometimes, when I pass by the old oak tree, I swear I feel a presence watching over me, a whisper of a boy who once wanted what I had. And though I'll never forget the fear and anger I felt, I've come to understand that the spirit was never my enemy. He was just a lost soul searching for a place to belong, much like I once was. I never thought much about my health. In the sprawling city of Caldrith, where steel towers stretched into the haze and neon lights buzzed all night, life moved fast, and I moved slow. As a data technician in one of the countless high-rise firms, I spent my days tethered to a desk, devouring takeout meals and drowning in code. Nights weren't much different. Dim apartment lights, greasy noodles, and virtual shows flickering on an outdated holoscreen. Exercise? Not part of the plan. That all shifted when my uncle, my last close relative, passed unexpectedly. Heart failure. Same age as me, 43. His death was like a shockwave. The man had always seemed invincible. Yet there he was, gone in an instant. It hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because deep down, I knew I was on the same path. I needed to change. The first step? Running. The city had one green space left untouched by the endless construction. Helix Park. It wove through abandoned factories and forgotten streets. Few people went there after dark, but that's when I liked it most. Quiet, empty, safe from judgment. Every Friday night, after work, I ran. 2 miles through the winding paths, the hum of the city fading with each step. I'd lost weight, felt stronger. But that night, last Friday, was different. It started like usual. I laced up my worn sneakers, slid my headset over my ears, and stepped out into the city's restless glow. The headset glitched. No sound. I didn't bother fixing it. The hum of electric rails overhead and distant sirens would do. The streets were mostly empty as I made my way toward the park entrance, marked by rusted gates that creaked even when untouched. The city lights dimmed here, swallowed by the shadows of old brick buildings. Helix Park was a strange place. The paths snaked between thick brush and towering skeletal trees, remnants of a time before glass and steel ruled the skyline. The air always felt cooler here, though I tried not to think about why. The city left this place to rot. But I liked the stillness. It cleared my mind. Halfway into my run, something shifted. I should have noticed sooner. The path ahead, usually clear, was blocked. A figure stood there, tall, unmoving. His silhouette stretched against the dim lights of distant skyscrapers. He wore a long coat, no, a cloak, its edges brushing the cracked pavement. I slowed, my breath catching in my throat. There shouldn't have been anyone here, not this late. "Hey!" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. He tilted his head, slow and deliberate, like he was studying me. My heart pounded, not from the run. Something about him wasn't right. His face was half hidden, but I could see the eyes. Wide, too wide. No reflection, just empty black. Like looking into the void between stars. I forced myself to walk forward. "You okay, man?" Still nothing. Then he moved. His head jerked violently side to side, as though something had snapped. His arms twitched beneath the folds of his cloak. I caught glimpses of pale hands scratching at his sides, erratic, desperate movements. He muttered something, whispers that didn't sound like any language I knew. I took a step back. This wasn't right. I fumbled for my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone. But when I glanced down to unlock the screen, I heard it. A rush of movement. My head snapped up. Gone. The path ahead was empty. No footsteps. No sound. Just stillness. I froze. The darkness beyond the trail seemed heavier now. I turned back the way I came, picking up my pace. My breath echoed in my ears. Every shadow felt alive. I risked a glance behind me. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling like I was being watched. I sprinted the last few blocks home. My apartment tower loomed above, its steel frame reflecting the dim streetlights. I punched in the code at the side entrance with shaking fingers. The lock clicked open. Inside, I leaned against the door, letting the familiar scent of stale air and dust settle my nerves. I told myself I was safe. It was over. But then, the doorknob rattled, not hard, just a soft jiggle. I froze. My apartment was on the 5th floor. No balconies, no fire escapes. No one should be at my door. Slowly, I turned the latch for the peephole. Darkness. Not the dim hallway light I expected, just pitch black, like the world outside had been swallowed. My breath caught. The darkness blinked. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. That wasn't darkness. It was an eye, wide, all black, pressed so close to the peephole it swallowed the view. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but I stood there, frozen. Then, the figure pulled back. I saw him, standing on the faded welcome mat. His hands raked across his face, tearing at his skin. Blood streaked his cheeks, flesh peeled beneath his nails. But he didn't flinch. His eyes, still wide, never left mine. They questioned me. Standard stuff. What did he look like? Was he armed? Did I know him? No. The taller officer exchanged glances with his partner. "Don't worry," he said. "We've got plenty of evidence." "Evidence?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Yeah," he said, gesturing toward the door. "You should see this." Confused, I stepped outside. The officer slowly shut the door behind me so I could see the front. My stomach turned. The door, my door, was smeared with streaks of dark red. Blood. Strips of torn skin clung to the wood. Clumps of black hair stuck in ragged patches. I realized then why I had seen only darkness through the peephole. He hadn't been standing outside. He had been pressed against the door. His face, his entire face, had been flattened against the wood, leaving behind a grotesque imprint. I stumbled back into my apartment. The officers said something. I couldn't hear. My mind replayed the blink, the eye, the scratching. The city outside hummed like always. Life went on. But I knew. He was still out there. I can't tell you the name of the town where this happened. Legally, I'm bound to silence. I had to sign all sorts of documents when I took the job. Papers stamped with official seals, reviewed by lawyers who wore smiles sharper than knives. Even now, after everything that went down, my lips are sealed. All I can say is that it was a small, overlooked town with a factory at its heart. The kind of factory that processed dangerous things. Not chemicals, not weapons. Data. I started working there 6 years ago, managing security for the night shift. Sounds important, right? It wasn't. Mostly, I stared at a wall of monitors, watching empty hallways and dimly lit rooms. Occasionally, I buzzed in the odd delivery or wandered through the server rooms, listening to the low hum of machines processing more information than I could ever comprehend. The real power players, the data scientists and executives, worked from the top floor of the old building, a place I rarely had cause to visit. They were the kind of people who acted like the world belonged to them. Too busy, too rich, and always losing things. USB drives, access cards, personal gadgets. When I found them, I locked them in a drawer in my office until someone came to claim them. It wasn't technically part of my job, but I didn't complain. I needed the job too badly. I had my little brother, Evan, to take care of. Our parents were long gone, and I was all he had. He was 11 when this story begins. Bright, inquisitive, but quiet. I didn't like leaving him alone overnight, but rent had to be paid and bills didn't care about orphans. When my manager offered me the night shift after some daytime budget cuts, I didn't hesitate. At least Evan could come with me. The rules were simple. He had to stay out of sight, preferably in the back office with his books or a game console. Evan didn't mind. He liked the silence of the building at night, or so he said. The building itself was a relic. Concrete walls, flickering LED panels, and server rooms cooled to an unnatural chill. At night it seemed to breathe. Pipes groaned. Lights buzzed. Sometimes I thought I heard faint whispers traveling through the ventilation shafts, but I chalked it up to tiredness. Then the first thing happened. It was around midnight. I heard a sharp clatter from the main elevator shaft. Evan peeked from behind my desk, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Probably just maintenance," I lied. But I knew that wasn't right. Maintenance never came after hours. I got up and approached the elevator. The sound came again, metal grinding against metal, louder this time, like something was clawing at the inside of the shaft. I reached for the call button, hand trembling. Before I could press it, the elevator doors slid open, empty, but the noise had stopped. The air seemed thicker somehow, like the whole building was holding its breath. I forced a smile for Evan and told him everything was fine. But I didn't believe it. The next morning after dropping Evan off at school, I got a call from the day shift supervisor. One of the executives, the ones from the top floor, had been found dead in his office. Cause of death, unknown. The details were scarce, but I heard whispers. His skin had blistered, his lungs collapsed, like he had suffocated from the inside. No one had an explanation. And it didn't stop there. The executives started dying one by one, always at night, always in their offices. Sometimes they were found slumped at their desks. Other times pressed against the glass windows, their hands clawing at the surface as though trying to escape. Their bodies bore the same signs. Collapsed lungs, blistered skin. Rumors spread quickly. Toxic air leaks. A malfunctioning server emitting dangerous radiation. But inspections revealed nothing. The company, desperate to quiet the panic, brought in specialists. They found no issues, but the deaths continued. I stopped bringing Evan with me. He didn't argue, but I could tell he was curious. Too curious. The building grew colder. The lights flickered more often. Sometimes while patrolling the server floors, I'd hear footsteps echoing behind me. Quick, light steps. But when I turned around, no one. The elevators would stop on random floors, doors sliding open to empty halls. I slept less, ate less. The building was eating away at me. Then came the night I'll never forget. The elevator stopped working entirely. The security system flagged unauthorized access to the top floor. I had no choice but to take the emergency stairs. As I climbed, the air grew thinner. My ears popped. The hum of the servers faded. When I reached the top floor, I froze. The last 4 executives had gathered in the main conference room, glass walls offering a clear view. They were huddled together, gesturing wildly, faces pale and drawn. As I stepped closer, the lights inside the conference room flickered and died. Silence. When the lights snapped back on, I stumbled back. The glass was smeared red. The executives lay scattered across the room, skin peeled, lungs collapsed, faces twisted in terror. That was the final straw. The company shut down the building overnight. The official story claimed structural issues. But I knew better. Weeks passed. The company dissolved after a journalist leaked documents proving that the executives had knowingly used flawed data storage systems that had led to fires at overseas data centers. Fires that killed dozens. The executives had known. They just hadn't cared. The deaths stopped after the shutdown. Life began moving again. Evan started high school. I found another job, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. The building stood empty, looming over the town, a hollow monument to greed. But the story doesn't end there. The day before the building was set for demolition, I remembered something. The drawer. The one where I kept all the lost items. USB drives, watches, ID cards, all belonging to the dead executives. I had never cleared it out. Reluctantly, I returned. The air inside the building was stale. The security system had been deactivated. As I reached my old office, a chill ran down my spine. I pulled open the drawer. Empty. Every single item. Gone. I knew what that meant. When I got home, Evan was waiting for me. He didn't look surprised to see me shaken. "You went back, didn't you?" he said quietly. I didn't respond. "I took them," he continued, eyes lowered. "All their things. That night when you were dealing with the elevator, I remembered what Dad used to say about the old traditions. You remember, right? The stories about curses. How personal items hold power." I stared at him. My mouth went dry. "I didn't know what would happen," Evan whispered. "But I was so angry. They caused those fires, those deaths. They deserved it. I thought it would scare them. Not that." I sat beside him, my hands cold. "They didn't hurt you, though, did they?" His voice cracked. "No," I said slowly. "They didn't." He looked at me, his eyes searching for judgment. Did they deserve it? I thought about those men, the lives they ruined, the people they left to burn, the silence they bought with money. And I looked at my brother, my quiet, clever brother who had done what no one else could. "Yes," I said at last. "They did." Evan smiled, small, almost sad. "Maybe you're wondering what kind of place teaches its children such things. What kind of town holds on to old stories about curses and revenge, but you'll never know. Because I can't tell you.